Some breaking news. NSC Coordinator John Kirby announcing that President Biden ordered another, quote, high-altitude object to be shot down today. Now, this object was observed over Alaskan airspace. Take a listen.
So I can confirm that the Department of Defense was tracking a high-altitude object over Alaska airspace in the last 24 hours. The object was flying at an altitude of 40,000 feet and posed a reasonable threat to the safety of civilian flight. Out of an abundance of caution and at the recommendation of the Pentagon, President Biden ordered the military to down the object. And they did, and it came inside our territorial waters. Those waters right now are frozen, but inside territorial airspace and over territorial waters. Fighter aircraft assigned to U.S. Northern Command took down the object within the last hour.
All right, for more, I want to bring in Chief Justice Correspondent Pierre Thomas, ABC News senior Pentagon reporter Louis Martinez, along with ABC News national security and defense analyst and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, Mick Mulroy. Louis, I'm going to start with you. What is the latest you're learning from the Pentagon?
Alexis, this is a balloon. Well, excuse me, we should not call it a balloon. This is an object, a high-altitude object. That is the terminology that is being used by the White House to describe this. It was at 40,000 feet. It was detected late Thursday night. The United States had it tracked. The United States sent fighter aircraft to get eyes on it. Because it was nighttime, they had to send additional aircraft during the daylight. What they found was that it was unmanned. And at that point, President Biden took his military advisor's recommendation to shoot it down because it posed a reasonable threat. The threat that John Kirby, you just heard him talk about there, was the threat to civilian aviation. We know that that Chinese reconnaissance balloon that was shot down last Saturday was flying at an altitude of 60,000 feet. That is significantly higher than the air lanes for civilian aircraft. However, this object, this high-altitude object, was at an altitude of 40,000 feet, so it could pose some kind of a threat. We need to couch this. This was an object the size of a car. That is the total size of this object, according to John Kirby. He made the comparison. You had previously that Chinese surveillance balloon from last week. That was 20 stories tall and was carrying a payload of 3 buses, the length of 3 buses. So significantly different. But in this case, you heard Mr. Kirby talking about the importance of security for President Biden, and that is why President Biden decided to take action in this case. Of course, you heard from the questions. There are a lot of questions about why did you shoot this one and not the previous one?
Lots of questions still unanswered. We continue to learn more. And Pierre, I understand that you have some new reporting from the FBI on that spy balloon. We can call that a balloon, that spy balloon from last week. What can you tell us?
Well, there's a pretty massive effort that the FBI is putting in place for when all the parts are recovered from the balloon that was shot down just off the coast of South Carolina. And what I'm being told is that they have every kind of expert that you can put in place to gather the parts and literally reconstruct of the balloon as best they can, and all the electronics. They want to know how did it steer, how was it communicating back to China, how was it gathering information, what kind of cameras did it use. They want to know everything about it. It's very similar to when they reconstructed Flight TWA 800, which crashed off the coast of the U.S. in the Atlantic in the 90s. And they, again, this is critical, my sources are saying, because the key is they want to know exactly what were the Chinese trying to get, how were they able to get it, and how much of it were they able to get.
And Mick, I understand U.S. military and Chinese military are not having direct communication here. Secretary Austin's call is not being answered by the Chinese. How can diplomacy here work when they're not even picking up the phone?
So that's a good question, Alexis, and this is a time where militaries really need to be communicating with one another. Diplomacy can have its bumps in the road, but militaries need to be able to communicate so there is no miscommunication that could cause a larger conflict, or a conflict in this case, to happen. And I think it's very important that Secretary Austin's call is answered this time by the Chinese Minister of Defense.
Louis, why did Kirby come out so quickly and talk about this new high-altitude object because they did not get out ahead of the Chinese spy balloon from last week.
Noticeable differences, Alexis. Noticeable differences. This shoot-down occurred about an hour and a half ago, and you saw that John Kirby's briefing kept getting delayed and delayed, and when you cover Washington long enough, you know that that means something is up. And in this case, it sounds like they were waiting for word that this had actually happened. And Kirby coming out and saying initially that there is no blame here. They're not ascribing this to China. They're saying they don't know what it is. They know that it has crashed on top of some frozen water, because this is up near the Arctic Circle in Prudhoe Bay in the very northeast tip of Alaska, close to the border with Canada. But they're not ascribing any attribution to this. They say we want to figure out what it is first, but they did say that it was a threat. That's very different from what we've heard over the last couple of days now about that spy balloon as it transited over Alaska, when NORAD's commander said that it was not deemed to be an imminent hostile threat. In this case, they determined that because it was at 40,000 feet close to civil aviation lanes, it did pose a reasonable threat. But you're exactly right. The White House is getting ahead of this very, very quickly.
And Mick, we still don't know what kind of object this is. We know it was the size of a car. We know that it was flying considerably lower than the balloon at 40,000 feet versus the 60,000 feet of the balloon. But do you think perhaps we shot this down prematurely? Because I know that President Biden was criticized last week for taking too long to shoot down the balloon.
So I think it's really important that we find out exactly what this is so we don't jump to any conclusions. But I would also point out that it might have been our studying of the balloon that did travel across the United States that gave us the ability to find this signature, to be able to detect it in Alaska and, quite frankly, interdict it there, which is where we should be interdicting these objects. And I think that's a positive. There's a lot of negative in this, and I do think we need to make sure that we know exactly what this is before jumping to any conclusions. But it is troubling if this should be another Chinese spy balloon.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.